Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for having me. Thank all of you for being here. I'd like to particularly thank Professor Shabana Mitra, who put all this together. Thank all of you. Professor Mitra and I have three things in common. We have a keen interest in public policy. We're both related to Sultanpur district in UP, and we're both married to Bengalis. And for all three of them, Professor, you have my condolences. So I became an MP in 2009. In 2014, when I was re-elected, I thought that we would make a movement. A friend of mine and I, both economists by training, we put together an economic model which showed that certain people, marginal farmers, weavers, people from the financial underclass, when they fell within these indicators, they were about 4 or 5 times more likely to commit suicide. We tested this out in 22 districts in UP. We tied up with the district administration to identify such persons. And then we created 4,872 individual models for all these people because we felt that if we just gave a handout, there would be a high rate of economic recidivism. So we didn't want them to fall back into debt, and so we made schemes for all of them, and about 30% of them still fell back into debt, but we managed to help about 70% of them. You know, I started this process of writing this book because I felt that whether you help one person or 5,000 people in India, it really is of no great consequence. If you have to help 3, 4, 500 million people, the only way to do so is by transforming policy. And I thought, if this has to be done, I first need to know what a village is. What is it? Is it something that can survive as an interdependent economic unit, if not an independent economic unit? What is the socio-psychology we're dealing with? And I did a deep dive. I spent a year going across the country, just listening to people, just making field notes, going from place to place. I went to 11 states, including this beautiful state right here, and hopefully learned something, and then I started writing it the next year after that. I started this journey in a small village in Uttarakhand called Raini, near Almora, where the Chipko movement started from. And I was amazed that Chandi Prasad Bhatt and Sundarlal Bahuguna, without phones, without telecom networks, without rail networks, without any people-to-people contact, could actually get out and plant 10 million trees and stop a whole lot from being cut. And then I actually came to Bangalore to give a lecture after that at the National Law School. And at that point, I think it was 2016, there was this steel flyover project of which there was a lot of protest. And young people, I read on the front page of a paper, started a WhatsApp group called Jhatka, and they said, anybody that gives a missed call, we will consider to be part of our larger movement. And 100,000 people gave a missed call in one day. And so they felt emboldened, and they formed a human chain around those trees, which would have been cut had that steel flyover project been there the way it was supposed to. And then the chief minister had to bow down before people power and say that, right, we will build this flyover, but now we will go back to the drawing board and build it without cutting a single tree. And so that really inspired me. I don't want to talk about the book per se, because talking about fertilizer and pesticide and all that might put a lot of people here to sleep. But on a serious note, I want to talk about the issues that run through this book in thematic terms. So one of the issues is of inequality. There was a retired teacher called Deep Chand Sharma in Alwar in Rajasthan, who one day wrote a letter to the Prime Minister's office saying that I want to give a check of 1 lakh to the poorest person in India. And he got the check back saying, we have no idea who the poorest person in India is. He sent it back saying, can you give this to 1 out of the 100,000 poorest people in India? And they said, sorry, we have no idea who those are. And the day I read this in a newspaper, on the front page it said, "Congratulations, India gets its 70th billionaire." And I thought, in this vulgar celebration of conspicuous consumption and wealth, has the last man in society completely evaporated from national narrative? And so I started looking, at those last men, which is what this book really is about. There is no greater inequality that we see in India than water. I was studying water, particularly in Marathwada, in Maharashtra, and I was in Latur when the chief minister did something very good, which is he sent a water train with 500,000 liters of water, and it was looted 16 times. People looted the train for 6, 5, 10, 15 liters of water, and it took 2 days to get there, a 300-kilometer journey. And after that, I went to Bombay University to speak. And while I was driving there, I saw a big hoarding. It said Aquaria Grand, an apartment complex where there's 200 apartments and 200 full-size swimming pools. And it said to replicate life in an aquarium. I thought, why would anybody want to live in an aquarium? But moreover, I found it really obscene that in a state where people were looting trains for water, somebody was building 200 full-size swimming pools in an apartment complex. In this book, we did a lot of work in Beed, Latur, Jalna, Osmanabad, etc. And I took one village in Beed, a very big village with about 6,000 people, and I just looked at water consumption between the richest person in the village and the poorest person. And the richest person in the village, who owned about 140 acres of land, was consuming 30 times more water every day than the poorest person. So in Mumbai, in Maharashtra, 3 districts, which is Mumbai, Pune, and Thane, consume 61% of the water, 3 out of 36 districts. And when I asked why, they said, well, it's a monetized asset, and those who pay more will get more. The problems facing agriculture are not rocket science. They're not terribly difficult. When I was studying the historicity of agriculture in India, I looked at Bombay presidency, I looked at Madras presidency, I looked at a number of them, but I looked at Bombay presidency closely, which is, of course, as of today, Gujarat and Maharashtra. And the British decided to invest very heavily in irrigation in southern Bombay presidency, which is now Gujarat, because Gujarat and Maharashtra, as you know, have no major rivers running through them. And so they invested in irrigation, but they didn't invest in irrigation at all at what is now Vidarbha, because Vidarbha, half of it was then in a state called CP and Berar, and half of it was in what the British Economic Gazette calls a jungle area. And so they didn't invest a penny there. And so today, cotton farmers inhabit much of Vidarbha and much of central and northern Gujarat. Cotton input prices have risen almost 3 times in the last 10 years. The farmers of Gujarat are stressed, but because they have irrigated fields, they have lower input costs and therefore can give it to apparel, textile, handloom, etc. And so there hasn't been any rate of farmer suicide. In Vidarbha, where they have access to 9% irrigation, in the last 7 years, you've had 1 farmer committing suicide every single day. And that's a real statistic. When there's a lot of economic pundits that say that, loan waivers are a terrible idea, and how can you just give a handout in terms of right to food, loan waivers, grants, etc. to farmers. I want to remind everybody here that the NPA crisis is not because farmers didn't pay back their loans, right? So I did a study which took me a long time, which I'm happy to send to you here at IIM, which is every single penny that has been paid out to farmers as loan waiver from 1957, which was the first one, to 2016. Center and state, every single one, and then every single financial subsidy which has been given to the top 100 industrial groups in India, right? Just in terms of money that was, maaf karo, to use a colloquial term. And the total amount of farm subsidy given in terms of loan waivers, etc., which we're talking about 61% of people versus 100 families, so maximum, what, 2,000 people? The total farm loan waivers add up to 19% of just the amount of money that has been written off for the top 100 industrial families of India. Now, if that doesn't frighten you, then we obviously have a different idea of what's frightening. So why are farmers poor? Now, this is a very, very big question. This would take about 3 hours just to answer this. But I looked at just one thing. I looked at, there's a sleepy little town outside Lucknow called Malihabad. And Malihabad's famous for mangoes. And I just went and I spent a lot of time there just studying, the mango industry there. And I'd read a study of 1972, which said that orange, when you look at what farmers get as opposed to end user price, for oranges, they get 2%, right? And the study was done in Calcutta in 1972. It's a very famous study. And if you look at, even in Malihabad, how much the farmers get, if you look at Lasalgaon, which is the big onion mandi in Maharashtra, they get between 13 and 15%. That's it. But the crazy thing is, of all fresh fruits that are produced in India, 53% of them rot within the first 96 hours of post-harvest. 53% of all fresh fruits. Now just look at how the economies of, say, Uttarakhand, Himachal, J&K are dependent, and you will just see how much income destruction is within that fact. Because, so when you look at just rethinking APMCs, which in Hindi you would call mandis, right? So what are the facts? The mandis in India have 6% storage capacity. That's it. So like I gave you the example of Malihabad, Uttar Pradesh produces 2,000 tons of mangoes every year and has done so for the last 15 years. The production has not gone up, it's not come down. And yet, what is the storage capacity? It's between 60 and 80 tons. Now, one would think that if you produce 2,000 tons and you know you produce that much, one would think you ramp up your storage capacity and don't lose 60% of it in transportation, rotting, etc. But it hasn't happened. Look at one of the big themes through this book is decentralization. So I looked at an example. There's a district in Punjab called Moga. And Manrega, which is supposed to actually not involve any thekedars, any, what do you call thekedar in English? Any contractors, right? So when you, so I looked at this thing in Moga where they gave 170 crores just to the district for Manrega to just build farm-to-farm roads and farm-to-market roads. And then 1 year later, somebody filed a PIL in court saying, wait a minute, all farm-to-farm roads and farm-to-market roads were already built. So what did they build? And they built nothing. It's just that the Pradhan did a deal with everybody. They took their signatures and he gave it to a subcontractor. And this is happening across district upon district in our country. When we look at even stubble burning, right? It's a big issue, particularly in Delhi. Everywhere you go to speak, people say, but these farmers are creating this pollution. And it's partially true, but what is the economics of it? So 2,500 rupees is the penalty per acre if you're caught stubble burning. But 6,000 rupees per acre is what it costs you to process that stubble. So what are you going to do? Right? If you look at diesel, the mechanized cost, if you look at labor. Now, when I did an experiment in my erstwhile constituency, Pilibhit, which is we just took marginal farmers and we told them that, look, you will retain the ownership of your land, but your marginal farming is failing. So can we just create larger land lots and put them together, right? And you will get a certain amount of money, which is more than 25% of what you made in both Rabi and Kharif last year. And they said, that's great, if our future is secured, we have no problem with that. And what ended up happening was that when these farms got collectivized, which is of course a Russian term from the 1930s, so I don't use it, but when they got together, the agricultural input costs fell by 50%. You know, even if you look at something like which are the states that produce rice and wheat or sugarcane, right? It's just a problem that needs no solution. It's right in front of you. Punjab has 81% of blocks which are water stressed, right? Severely water stressed. Why is Punjab producing paddy and wheat? Right? Why is, so this is why is Bihar not doing it? Because Bihar is the land now of marginal agriculture where a small farmer will do vegetables, etc. because, there are psychological reasons for that. One of the crazy things that I noticed when I was going all over India is I was trying to study why the land is going bad, why the land is getting poisonous and why water level is shrinking and the toxicity is rising. And the answer was very bizarre because I couldn't find it in any study, and I spoke to all these agronomists, etc. So this is the answer, and it sounds very simplistic, but unfortunately it's the truth. The people that farm in India are the martial communities, right? The Patels, the Sikhs, the Gujars, the Gaudas, etc., 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 in different parts of India. So their self-image is that we are the strong men of this area, and they want to see their crops replicate that strongman image. So it's like if you go to a sugarcane crop in Australia, it's got double the sugar content, but it's this big. And then you go to a sugarcane crop where I'm MP from, and it's this big, but the sugar content is 1/3, right? And why is that? It's that because our NPK, you know what that is, right? Nitrogenous fertilizer, which they're using urea, phosphorus, and potassium. It's supposed to be 4:2:1. At the moment, it's 10:0.6:0.1. And why do we do that? Because when you pack it full of potassium and phosphorus, the molecular structure gets tighter, right? So the crop looks much smaller, but it packs it full of nutrient, right? When you pump it full of nitrogen, it's toxic for the land because it's salt, basically, right? And the land already is salty. And so your crop is like 100 foot high, but it doesn't have any nutrient in it. So we looked at all these things. I'm at this very prestigious Institute of Education, and there's a thought that's running through my mind constantly because I come from every possible privilege there is. And I just wanted to know, that are we now in a country where privilege perpetuates privilege? And I want to talk something about that. What is the most coveted job for a middle-class person in India today? It's probably a civil service job. Is that fair? An IAS job or something for a normal middle-class person? So I did an RTI, Professor. You must hear this. How does it pan out? You often think of an IAS, IPS, or IRS officer as somebody who could come from Madhubani, or Balia, or Rewa, or Mandya, or something, but it's not the case. 84% of all serving IAS officers in India today have grown up in the top 15 cities of India. 81% of all serving IAS officers in India today have had private education. 70% of them have postgraduate education. And all of you know that postgraduate education in our country is a luxury because most people have to pay back, very quickly. And so where does this inequality start from? It starts from school. So to give you a figure, there are 15.5 lakh schools in India, right? And how many of these schools are ICSE, CBSE, and IB? Just 1.5%. That's it. Otherwise, everything is state board, madarsa board, etc., 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 right? Now, out of these 1.5% of people, I just did a study at IIT, right, where I was day before yesterday, and I just did a study at IIT And I was speaking at IIT Bombay, so I said, I'd like to ask you a question before I come. Can you give me this information? They said, sure, and they were very sweet about it. And I said, what percentage of people at IIT Bombay and IIT Ahmedabad have, at IIT Bombay and IIT Kharagpur have started from CBSE, ICSE, and IB, which is 1.5%. You know what the figure was? 97.5%. That means if you're not in that 1.5%, and the figures for IIM Bangalore would be almost exactly the same, unfortunately, right? And so what does it mean? I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, we should definitely put our kids in private school, but how do you do it, right? So, I mean, I did a study of one district in Himachal called Kangra, and the average private school fees is about 55,000 rupees a year. This is a conservative estimate, right? And if you look at the socioeconomic caste census data, that excludes like 75% of India. So, you know, what are the answers? I mean, Supreme Court said that 25% of seats should be filled for economically weaker sections, said that in 2012. But as of today, only 19% of those seats have been filled. You know, we look at NPAs, right? But what are education loans? Education loans are 70,000 crores today. Just education NPAs are 7,500 crores today, right? And funnily enough, 70% of them come from 6 states in India. That's it. Kerala is the biggest. You know, which means people are aspirational, but they just don't earn enough to pay back those loans, so they put up their hands at some point in time. You know, I mean, if you just look at something very basic, which is 12 lakh people sat for the IIT exam last year, 11,000 got in. Everybody who sits for that place would have taken some kind of tuition, right, which would have costed you between 1 and 3 lakh rupees if you take it for, say, a year or 2 years. Those are just, you know, student loans that are waiting to be paid back. So, you know, what are the answers? So one thing that I figured out, I don't want to talk too much about non-formal education, but that really is one of the answers. I took a village in Lakhimpur Kheri in Uttar Pradesh, and we tried to make it a model education village. And what we did was we converted the village into an agri-business, right? So we said, you know, learning by doing, selling, and earning. And we just taught them basic things. It was by the side of a river, so we taught them how to do certain things which are linked with the river. And I found not only that did school rates go up when people found that they actually learn a skill set which will make them sustainable in terms of income generators, but then their parents started coming to school. You know, because they were equally uneducated, and they said, okay, well, there's a value add here that's different. When we look at every uneducated postgraduate in India, right? So every unemployed postgraduate in India, if you take 10% of them, and just 10% of them go out for 1 year to a village of their choice in India and teach, just for 1 year for the country, we will solve our problem of teacher shortage in 1 day. That's a real statistic. So we have to start thinking outside the box. And 10% of unemployed postgraduates is not a very difficult number, I would imagine, right? I was in America over the summer, and I had a chance to meet Jeff Bezos. And I said, Mr. Bezos, how come when you came down to India, you were #1 on day 1? Because it's a difficult economy to understand. It's very layered. So he said, actually, you know, it's strange. He said, we did come to India, obviously, on day 1. But I had a team of 1,500 people doing market research for 5 years before we came. And I said, I don't understand. And he said, well, in places like Kanpur and Rourkela and Asansol, we had people telling us what the Indian ecosystem is like. And I said, well, what did you learn? And I thought he would give me a cursory answer like, yeah, sure, I'll send it to you by email. But he told it to me like this, and he said three things. He said, one, Indians have a lot of smartphones, but they're cheap. So if you put a very heavy app on it, the phone will crash and nobody will download it ever again. Two, the trading community is very vocal, very organized, and powerful. So if they feel that this is a kind of assault on them, they will do what they did in 1977, which is go out on the streets, and that's why Coca-Cola got chucked out, right? And the third thing he said was that Indians have been invaded and colonized so many times, so very sensitive to this, so Indians have to feel like they're a part of this process, that it's not an imposition from outside. So I said, what did you do? And he said, one, we put the lightest Amazon app anywhere in the world. Two, it's the only country where in the top 5 cities of India, the person from a kirana store, from a corner store, who sells you something on Amazon, if they do, they get 1% of the profit, which is, there's no model like that for Amazon anywhere in the world. And on Amazon Tatkal, you can actually sell whatever with proof of verification in half an hour. And so you feel like you're a partner in that. And so I thought it was, very interesting. And so why in India are we not looking at innovation? Why are we not looking at the implementation of new ideas to create value for a country, an organization, an enterprise, whatever? I mean, there are 91,000 Indian origin science and tech PhDs in America. 91,000. You know how many there are in India? 900. In science and tech. That's it. Right? That's nothing. Okay? And I went to NASA many years ago in Houston. And I went there and I said, can I have lunch at the cafeteria? And they were like, sure. And when I went to the cafeteria, the only language that I heard was Telugu. That was the only language in Houston, Texas. And I thought that when I'd ask those people, they would say, we're from Wisconsin and we're from Michigan. But they said we're from Kakinada and we're from Bhadrachalam and I thought that was amazing, and Indians are the smartest people in the world. I mean, everybody recognizes that, right? And, so how are we going to get there? I mean, how many of you watch Shark Tank? Have any of you seen Shark Tank? Right. Have you seen Shark Tank, Professor? Do you have Netflix? You should. Yeah. And it's a legitimate question. And anyway, so on Shark Tank, right, the question that they keep asking you first is, do you have a patent? Right? Do you have a utility patent or a design patent? Right? So I find it really strange that in Europe, in Australia, and America, the average time to get a utility patent is between 4 and 7 months. In India, it's between 3 and 4 years. I mean, all of you know that in 3 or 4 years, your technology is going to be completely obsolete. Right? Some guy sitting in Hunan is going to make the same thing. I mean, even just look at, everybody talks about India as the Sone ki chidiya. Right? Do you know where that phrase comes from? Does anybody know? It comes from Vasco da Gama. And when he landed in Calicut, he said that India is like a golden bird waiting to take flight. Do you know why he came to India? He came to India for calico, unfinished cotton, and silk. At that time, India was the richest country in the world. But 40% of our GDP came from textile, right? And today, it's under 2%. Bangladesh is the fastest growing country in Southeast Asia economically. They're spending 14% of their GDP on textile. And I went there, I said, how is that possible? And they said, look, we don't want to do shipping, we don't want to do steel because we're not good at it. Our competitive advantage lies elsewhere. And plus, we have a whole load of people who are unemployed. Well, guess who else fits all those categories? Right? We have 130 million unemployed people between the age of 18 and 35. Right? People who have no education, no skills, no training. So how are we going to give these people work? By investing in industries which are labor intensive and yet have skill. We have 360 craft clusters in India today, right? If you go to Mangalgiri near Guntur, if you go to Chanderi near Guna, you will see that these cities, if you go to Bhadoi in UP, they were bustling, right? They were bustling cities. Today they're all ghost towns. Everybody's left because there's no work. And if we don't look at reviving handloom in India very seriously, we're going to have a huge, huge problem. I mean, when we just look at research, right? Look at the role of research in any economy. I mean, Israel, South Korea, spending 4.8% on their GDP on research. We're spending 0.6%, right? And why? I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but you look at all the PhDs that are coming out of India today, right? Where are their PhDs tested? Are they industry linked? They are not. If you're doing biochemical engineering in India, you know who checks your PhD? It's in a peer-reviewed journal. It's not Pfizer that checks it, right? If we don't industry link our research is not going to amount to anything, right? These are not self-contained institutions, right? These are meant to add to the body of knowledge in the external world, right? That's why these institutions are so important. And frankly, a peer-reviewed journal in today's day and age doesn't add up to a whole lot. It might be important in the academic sense, but, you know, we need to start looking at being part of the change ourselves. So what do I mean? I was in Hyderabad the other day, and I heard the example of Ravi Teja, who saw a pothole, and then he tried to fill it himself with gravel and sand and broken brick. And in Telangana, they were so impressed by this young child who was doing this that they awarded him and everything. And then Bangalore heard about him. And then they got him and they've made this BBMP pothole reporter. I think you must have all heard of it, right? Where if you upload a picture of a pothole, and if it's not fixed within 48 hours, then you get 100 rupees in your account, and 100 rupees is taken out of the municipal engineer who's supposed to look out of it, right? I thought it was a great idea. I want to replicate this all over the country. You know, and these are the things that are going to save. I was in Gurgaon the other day, and I heard about Aditya Mukherjee, who's been going all over in marriage halls and hotels and restaurants, just saying don't use plastic straws. See, you can't avoid totally using single-use plastic, right? But plastic straws, let's face it, are an indulgence, right? And he's got 10 lakh people to sign saying they will not use plastic straws, right? So these are the kind of changes that you need. So now I'm an MP from a place called Sultanpur. Next door is a constituency called Ambedkar Nagar. And I was in Ambedkar Nagar, and I met this amazing 24-year-old Dalit laborer called Shimla Kumari. And Shimla Kumari one day was at a brick kiln, at a Eat Ka Bhatta, and she said, can I have my money? Because you haven't paid me 2 days. And the contractor said, you can shove off. And she went to her cousin, who was a small peon at the district labor commissioner. And she complained to him, and he said, okay, I'll get you your money back. And when he said, how much is it? So she said, 60 rupees for 2 days. And he said, no, the government ordained rate is 120 rupees per day. And she said, well, for men it's 120, and for women it's exactly half. And I didn't believe this story, So I went from district to district, and it's true. Women for the same work get paid exactly half in labor. And when I was writing this book, right, I thought to myself, I said, think of an Indian farmer, right? If you think of an Indian farmer and get a picture of an Indian farmer in your mind, let's be honest, he's probably a middle-aged to aging man, right, wearing a white turban on his head, right? Probably from Western UP or Haryana or Punjab or somewhere like that. Guess what? You've just witnessed a Krishi Darshan ad from the 1960s on Doordarshan. 56% of all agricultural labor are women. But if you think about farmers, you never think of a woman. Am I right? But you go to any field across the country, the only people that you'll see working are women. So Shimla Kumari actually went from district to district, and she was uneducated, so she had to have two people with her, and they just went and took testimonials and affidavits from women who were working as laborers. And then she petitioned the then UP government, and it became such a big thing that they paid back 86 crore rupees in back payments over 3 years to female laborers. And I just thought it was an amazing, amazing thing. Two people I met in this journey really changed the way I looked at things. One was Babar Ali. I don't know if you've heard of him. From Murshidabad, I wanted to see why Murshidabad had gone from 40% literacy to about 85% in a certain pocket. And I asked the MP, and he said, ask Babar Ali. I said, who's Babar Ali? So I went to a small village in Murshidabad called Bhapta. And the story is this: when Babar was 9, he was the son of a very poor jute farmer. And he was the only child of his village that would go to school. And he would go to school, and he felt very guilty about this. So he would come back, and underneath a guava tree, he would teach everybody what he learned that day. And soon his fame grew, and so people started coming to learn from him. And it became, very famous. And CNN heard about him before any Indian media had, of course, heard about him. And they gave him the Global Hero of the Year award, along with 20 other people. It was $100,000, which is a lot of money, So he built a big school in his village. I mean, he's a kid. He said, I won't buy land. His money has come from education. It will go back. So his school is like bigger than this auditorium. Quite a lot bigger, actually, because it was done through Shramdan. The labor was given free by the villagers. And he just said three things. He said, everybody who studies at this school will study free, everybody who teaches will teach free, and everybody that studies will go back to their village and teach 3 people what they learned that day. And then the other villages got very competitive, because they said, if Bhapta can do it, then why can't we do it? So everybody started spending all their money on education, and they built all these schools. Today it's a 60-village education hub, which has gone in one generation from 39% literacy to 100% literacy. One guy did this. And the second example is Shrikant Bola. I don't know if you've heard of him. So Shrikant was born completely blind in a small village in Andhra. And he wanted to study science. He was very devoted to learning. And he wanted to study science in class 2. And his school said no. And they said, how can a blind person do this syllabus? So do humanities. And he went to court in Hyderabad. And the Hyderabad High Court said you can study whatever you want. And he studied science. He got 99%. And after he said he applied for IIT. And he got top 100 rank in IIT. And he got into IIT Delhi to do mechanical engineering. But IIT refused to take him because they said he's blind. How will he eat? How will he bathe? How will he go to the classes? How will he go to the mess to eat? We can't have 2 minders with him, so it's very difficult for us. This was a while ago. And he said, okay, so he took a gap year and he applied to MIT. And he's the first Indian to get a full scholarship at MIT. He was totally blind. Anyway, he went to MIT and he did astrophysics. And he topped it. He got #1. And then the US government, NASA, Google, Oracle, everybody said, come and work with us, Shrikant. And he said no, and he came back to India, and he started a company called Bolland Industries. Today it's a 300 crore company. They hire 2,000 people, 1,000 of whom are blind or severely disabled. I just... Every time you feel that life has been unfair to you, remember old Shrikant Bola. And I just want to talk very briefly, make a few points on political reform, because until politics changes, really nothing else is going to change. I looked at just 2 statistics. One is that 84% of the time in 2014, the richest candidate won the election. The richest candidate in that constituency won the election. And 100% of the time, the poorest candidate in every constituency lost their deposit, 100% of the time. So it just caused me to think, has money become the only arbiter for political success today? And what do you do about that? Because the truth is, we have elections around the corner. I mean, in India, we always have elections around the corner. But we have elections around the corner, and I was in Norway, and I was just interested because people said that it's the cleanest electoral system. And because America has super PACs and everything, so that's completely warped in terms of formalized corruption. And I was just looking at Norway, because in Norway, end to end, the election is 7 days, end to end. And there's no newspaper ads allowed, there's no TV ads, there's no billboards, there's no hoardings, there's no public assembly of over 1,000 people, right? So you're forced to compete on what you think, on your ideas. The reason why people vote in India on caste, region, or religion is because they can't differentiate between one candidate and the other on ability. So they think if all these guys are equally second rate, then we might as well vote for somebody who seemingly, fits into our identity politics mold. And that's why all these things happen, right? And the other thing that I want to talk about is direct democracy, because we're all of you are young people, and I aspire to be a young person. And I was looking at 60 countries all over the world which have the petition system. Do you know what the petition system is? So it's like in England, if 10,000 people sign, even if it's an e-signature on a particular petition, you have to get a reply from the PMO within 48 hours by law. And if 100,000 people sign, in the next parliament session, you get 1 hour to debate your issue. I mean, they have to debate it for 1 hour. Now, if the students of IIM Bangalore decide that something is of key importance to you and this should be debated in Parliament, how can you do so? You can't enforce it. You can go to your local MP, but then it's up to their whims and fancies or political capital or whatever, right? But if we have a system by law where if, say, 100,000 or maybe 500,000 people, if they sign on a particular thing, in the last parliamentary session, I went to the speaker and I said to her, ma'am, we have had no discussion in this session on how, thank you, we have had no discussion on how 12 of the 20 most polluted cities are in India. We should discuss this. And she said in Hindi that ye prasangik nahi hai, it's not relevant. You know, and so frankly, a politician's idea of what needs to be taken up and the nation's idea of what needs to be taken up, not Arnab's idea of what a nation needs to take up, but just the others, are two very different things, you know. So I just, want to say that I just want to end basically by saying that all of you are going to become wildly successful. But to me, as somebody who's a little older than you, it appears that a life well lived is a life which has purpose, right? And I've spent the last 2.5 years going up and down from literally the most desperate people in India. And so I just hope that a small part of your thoughts, your prayers, and your actionable, prayers and thoughts do have a place for those people. I hope that your social conscience enables you to keep them in your focus. The reason I don't take a salary in Parliament, the reason I don't take tickets from any institution that I go to speak to, the reason I've never taken money from any political party election that I've fought from, is because I want to remain free, right? I want to remain intellectually curious, I want to be brave, and I want to say the things which I feel need to be said. And I just want to say that whatever you do, just remember that a life of meaning and a life of purpose is beyond being rich and being successful and being famous. It's basically about earning the blessings of people, earning goodwill, earning something much more quantifiable. Thank you so much for having me here today. Good evening.